Hey, welcome. Today I want to talk about why men can't let themselves be deceived, specifically in regards to war. Um, I think the recent comments that have been floating around the MGTOW community about what Jordan Peterson said about how we're just cowards and we need to man up. This is kind of the way I think these more traditional type men see us, obviously. Um, but me, myself, I enjoy reading history. I've always been a really, really big history fan. Um, Dan Carlin, who I'm going to quote in this shortly here, he, for those of you who don't know, he's a history podcaster. Highly recommended if you haven't listened to him. Personally, I think he's basically the pinnacle of history podcasts. He's done some fantastic series, and if you haven't, check him out. I'll put a link in the low bar. But I want to start this off talking about the white feather movement, specifically World War One, but I do believe it went on in World War Two also. It originated in Britain, but I mean, obviously, stuff like this had been going on in every culture. This is kind of, I think, a thing throughout history for young men specifically into being manipulated into, walking voluntarily into the meat grinder. And anyway, I'm going to get right into it. I want to read this quote by Dan Carlin. This is from his series Blueprint for Armageddon. This is from episode 4. And just for some context, at this point in the war, this is World War One. There's been a lot of casualties and a lot of, for lack of a better term, blue pill men. The first men who signed up, and I mean a lot of these men were already many in the standing armies, but they're starting to see. I mean, the general population is starting to see what this war is. What their likelihood of, dying, quite frankly, is, or getting wounded. And they're having more and more trouble getting men to, like I said before, voluntarily walk themselves into the meat grinder. So keep that in mind as I read this quote. Here it is. You don't just replace those casualties by referring to the classic king and country methods. You're using more hardball methods at this point. And one of the ones I've always thought was just indicative of something that if you imagined it in modern times, it boggles the mind. Using a strategy like this today, it's absolutely genius. It shows exactly the most vulnerable point in a young man's psyche. I mean, the place where if you're a marketer, you're looking for what motivates people and how you can touch these elements of influence. And the Order of the Feather, the white feather movement, is absolutely brilliant in the regard. I mean, it's absolutely devious. He goes on. When August 14th rolls around, there's an admiral in the British Admiralty who's working like everyone else to think about how they can encourage more people to sign up for this horrible war. And he comes up with an attack on a motivation, a marketing strategy. He's going to enlist patriotic young British women, attractive young British women, to walk the streets of all of these towns in Britain. Their hometowns, with people they know, and if they see men who aren't in uniform, who look like they could be or should be, they're going to go up, surround this person, and start saying the most horrible things. You're a coward, and all these kind of terrible things to them. Pretty women in public dressing you down if you're 18 years old. That's a pretty good marketing strategy for someone who knows how to exploit people. Not just that, you probably are and probably were on the street of your hometown, where the passers-by know you or your family. This is a profoundly embarrassing moment for everyone around you, everyone connected with you. God forbid if you have a girlfriend, she's going to think this looks pretty bad for her too. The effect was huge. And then before this little group of women were done with you, they would put a white feather signifying cowardice on your lapel or somewhere very visible, on you. And this was not an unusual occurrence. There are accounts from people who say they were afraid to go outside the house sometimes because these patriotic and zealous women, who were really just trying to help, with the upholding of society's virtues. Now he gives an example. But I've got an account of a 16-year-old boy who had to go through this, and then he signed up for the service because he was so deathly embarrassed and afraid and ashamed, and the service person laughed him out of the room. But then he looked so downtrodden, he exaggerated his height, he exaggerated his age, he exaggerated his weight for him, and he was in. At 16, under 110 pounds, on the Western Front. It's absolutely deviously clever. End quote. And I mean, this is the reality of the way things were back then, for all of history, and for the most part, the way they are still. I have some newspaper clippings I want to read here. One of them, boy of 16 receives white feathers. Boy of 15 receives white feathers. This is from World War I. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence for these kind of teenager age boys to receive this. It's quite sad. I mean, this is another one here where a boy of 17 killed himself. This is a clipping I found from London I'm going to read. 2 white feathers framed in a question mark with the word coward in a girl's hand underneath drove a boy to kill himself. When Bernard Sills, age 17, received them by post, he put them on his cadet uniform, picked up his rifle, and went out. Later, he was found dead in a Tottenham air raid shelter with the rifle beneath him. I mean, how profoundly sad is that? And this is supposedly the era where women were incredibly oppressed. This is what it was like to be a late teenage boy, and this is the era where women were supposedly so oppressed. I mean, maybe they were. That's fine. Maybe they were oppressed. They probably were, but it's funny that we act like, these men were just totally free and that it was great to be a man back then. It wasn't even good to be a boy back then. I'm going to finish off Dan Carlin. He goes on to say how the government actually had to start giving out other symbols for people who came back from fighting because too many of them started getting white feathers. Men who had actually fought, who came back, usually because they were injured or maybe they had time or whatever you call it, shore leave or whatever the hell they call it. But these kind of men were getting feathers, so they had to government had to create a new symbol. So, you know what I mean, like a star or something to put on your lapel or a cross or whatever the hell, and then the women would know not to give them feathers. I actually found another funny newspaper clipping about these. This one's from London. Quote, to meet the growing nuisance and the menace of the white feather, the government may shortly issue a new badge. It will be distinct from the King's badge and will be given to officers and men who have come out of the service on health grounds under circumstances which do not entitle them to the King's badge. Thus, every ex-serviceman will have the protection against white feather distributors and reproachers for not being in uniform. It just boggles the mind. And here's one I found from Sydney, again from World War I era. Lieutenant J.L. Perry, who lost an eye in Syria, was handed a white feather by a woman in the street. Perry said nothing. He just dropped the glass eye from its socket into her hand. I mean, they don't care. This is a message to all men. I'm sure a lot of men already know this, but if you're going to sign up for something like this and do something like this, just make sure you're doing it for yourself. And I mean, as someone who studies history, I can say from my own experience of what I've read, usually you're not doing it for yourself. Usually you're just doing it for corporate interests or control of, your government trying to gain control of resources. It's usually just a total, crock. Everything they tell you you're fighting for. I mean, there are some just wars, no doubt. I believe in fighting for my freedom. I would fight for my freedom. But, I mean, World War One was as far as you could possibly come from a just war. There's no reason to be fighting that war. It's absolutely horrible, and it was for nothing. Let me read. I found an article from the Telegraph. I'll put this in the low bar too, about one of these kind of blue pill men who got the rude awakening when he got home. Quote, "Did the soldiers in the trenches feel the same indignation? If the work of our finest war poets is anything to go by, the target of their resentment was not so much at the men as the women at home. Take disabled Wilfred Owen's poem about a soldier who lost his limbs and returned to Britain only to find that the women he joined up to impress are ignoring him. His courage means nothing to them, and now he's in a wheelchair." Here's the poem. "Tonight he noticed how the woman's eyes passed from him to the strong men that were whole." And if that doesn't sum up the way women will see sacrifice, nothing else will. I mean, for those of you that have listened to Stardust's or Barbarossa's great videos about Briefeld's Law, that just sums it up perfect. That's the reality of sacrifice. It just perfectly illustrates Briefeld's Law, that when it comes to women, past sacrifice is no guarantee of future reward or commitment. That's just how it is. That's how they see it. That's how it is. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say about the White Feather movement. But also on this day, being the anniversary of the Battle of Vimy, me being a Canadian, if you haven't already deduced that by my accent, our Prime Minister was just in France to something about, it's the anniversary. It took place on Easter Sunday or Easter Monday or something in 19 whatever. It's something that, growing up as a Canadian, we were always taught to kind of revere this battle, It was like a symbol of Canadian manhood and pride. But like any battle in World War One, it was nothing. Like, we made it, like, I don't know, it was not many. You could count the number of kilometers that it advanced on one hand. And I believe the number, it's about 10,000 casualties. I think about 3,500 dead, 7,000 wounded type thing for just a tiny little strip of land. It accomplished absolutely nothing. And I mean, the war accomplished nothing other than stoking the fires for World War II. It's bizarre, the reverence we put towards events like this. And I mean, it's good we remember the men who sacrificed it, but it was for nothing. And it's something that we need to, I think, start thinking about a little bit differently. The reverence we have towards something like World War One is just bizarre. I mean, we didn't win. That's the biggest myth of World War One. Both sides lost. I mean, Germany lost worse. Germany, Austria, that Hungary, that whole area, they lost worse, sure, but we still lost. You're talking about millions dead in these allied countries, and I honestly believe countries like France still haven't recovered. It was such a blow to their psyche that they still haven't recovered. I mean, this is nothing to celebrate. We should celebrate in the same way the Germans celebrated. Just give reverence to it, maybe, in a way, but not this kind of national rah-rah type pride. It's wrong. It's not, it's a testament to everything that is wrong about the way society sees man, as disposable, as fighting for everyone else, but really he's dying for nothing. And nobody really appreciates him. At the end of the day, yeah, we give him a day or two here and there, but as the one poet said, at the end of the day, nobody, maybe on a societal level, they can, repeat the normal platitudes and stand for the national anthem and the fucking Jets at the football game, but at the end of the day, it doesn't give you anything that any other man already has. Nobody's going to revere you or marry you or love you because of that. Maybe the odd person, and I actually think that for the most part, men will revere other men who fought more than women will revere men who fought. But still, live for yourself. I mean, there's always going to be somebody out there who's going to shame you for not living up to what they want you to live up to. I mean, there's nothing wrong with sacrifice if that's what you want. If you feel it's a worthy cause, I want to put that disclaimer out there, because I'm not saying you should be selfish for the sake of being selfish. You should do what you believe in, and if sacrificing yourself is what you believe in, then for a certain cause, right? It is ultimately your choice. But don't ever do anything like that because of something like what Dr. Peterson said. Don't get married because a tradcon's going to call you a coward if you don't. You know what I mean? Don't go to war because some dame is going to give you a white feather. It's your life, and you need to live it for yourself in your own way. That's what it's all about. And I mean, once you go MGTOW, what a lot of us have come to realize, I think, at least speaking for myself, that a lot of these sacrifices aren't what they're held up to be. There's no glory in a lot of this. That there's massive risks, and as we all know, and there's very modest rewards for a lot of it, and it's something that I think we need to look at the evidence rationally and then decide from there whether we do want to make this sacrifice. And that's what MGTOW is all about for me. It's about the freedom to choose my own path and the freedom to do what I want, and not let outside influences influence me in a negative way, like shaming it. You can have outside influences if you're talking about like philosophical deliberation and self-contemplation, but you should never let external influences manipulate you into doing something that maybe you don't want to do. And a lot of the times most of the time, they wouldn't need to manipulate you in the first place if it was something that was good for you. There's a reason they're manipulating you. That's pretty much all I want to say. I'm hoping to make more videos in the future. Hoping to maybe bring my perspective. Like I said, I love reading history, so maybe I can bring something more on that angle of things. But hope you guys liked it. Talk to you later.